Today's show is focused on the review for the last week of May and heading into our first week of June activities of Tesla, the stock, etc. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. I hope your holiday weekend is going well, and we thank you for joining us. Just a reminder, we have a Patreon support area, and if you would like to get good information, charts, as well as special shows and previews on shows that are coming up, please join us on Patreon. I think you'll find it helpful. So today's show is kind of focused on our weekly review. The biggest thing, as we discussed last week, was a week ago Thursday, Elon actually came out and announced that the Plaid would be introduced. We then had, obviously what we had, which was starting mostly or somewhat the next business day, Friday into Monday, we definitely had movement in the stock price nicely, starting around 550. We pushed all the way up into the late 500s. But we then had sort of the 3-day rule hit starting Tuesday or so of the week, which gave Tesla a nice push up into the 630s, which I think totally made sense because, number one, we had a return to people choosing to own growth stocks that had been sold off dramatically. And then we also had the benefit of the fact that Tesla had some really good news, even if we could not quantify what that number was going to be for Plaid production and sales. So I thought fairly good week, with the only challenge being how does Bitcoin play out and how does it affect the numbers that we see from the company, and therefore how those numbers are going to be received by the market. So the answer is, wow. I'd have to say that we've established some very new, different patterns. In particular, what we had sort of been developing as a usual every week was that the prices at which the market makers would try to pin the stock of Tesla on a weekly basis were fixed in sort of a normal pattern of 600 or 500 or 550, kind of those 0-0 zones. And now we have new patterns showing up where large numbers of call options and put options are being traded and showing up at different price increments. And you kind of don't find out what they are until a day or two before expiration, when these new tiers are being established. So as we head into the coming week, I think it's prudent to expect sort of a similar outcome in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the focus of prices. I would say that, obviously we're at 650, almost there. Our lows are in the 620s right now. And, will the market punish Tesla based on the fact that we're delayed for a week on the introduction of Plaid? I think that's entirely possible, but I do think that there needed to be more of a runway to Plaid than we were seeing, and so I would not be surprised if the stock price sort of levitated between 10 and 15 points of where it is currently. Clearly, if there's hugely bad market or news that affects this, I think it could be a problem, but it looks as though there's been sort of an agreement worked out between the market and what the Fed and so forth are trying to do right now to sort of stabilize this interaction. For those of you who are fans of the New York Times, there's a columnist named Paul Krugman, and for our Patreon supporters, we reference him particularly when he has useful articles about the economy, etc. But what a lot of people don't realize about Professor Krugman is that I actually got a chance to meet him when he was teaching at Stanford as a professor, and I was kind of stunned because if you go back and read about him relative to the Wall Street Journal, there are entire countries, namely Singapore and Malaysia, that actually reconstructed their economy along the lines of his research and did very well doing it. So after reading about this in the Wall Street Journal 25 years ago, and now he has his Nobel laureate, I tend to have an opinion where some people don't like him, etc. My thought process on the whole thing is that I couldn't believe that one person had the power to cause multiple countries to redo their economic structure based on someone's research, which is what happened with him, and I think part of the reason why he won the Nobel laureate. So if you get a chance, I'd highly recommend, I think he's worth it to even subscribe to the online New York Times for $10 a month just to get an opportunity to read his once or twice columns, because the stuff he puts out is excellent. And what I think is funny about reading him and knowing him for so long is that when he talks about the Fed and the movements of the Biden administration or any of the administrations that while he's been a columnist, is that when he makes comments, a lot of his comments seem cavalier and off the hinge, but he does include large numbers of charts that are basically him teaching his class relative to his Nobel laureate. And I think it's an incredible opportunity to get more information to make better decisions. And then you get a ringside seat to watch the dialogue between him and his research and what the Fed is doing, because I really think that his comments are historically based, well carefully researched, make sense, and have an excellent basis for what he's doing. So I would say if you get a chance, getting the chance to read Paul Krugman is awesome. And I think it's funny because he's so good at what he does that there's actually blogs that specialize in taking his column and looking through to glean further sort of information that people hadn't thought about after sort of taking his class that's being written in the New York Times. Because what's really great is all the people that are in the Fed and the Treasury are reading his column as well and working to make sure they apply the logic of what he's presenting. So I just think it's an unusual, fantastic situation for us to get great information by being a part of sort of the public intellectual circle that he's running right now. And it's rare, unusual, unique, and terrific. And I just got some hate mail in my Patreon about the fact that I'll clip and attribute small portions of what he says when I think it's interesting and useful. But it's not about the fact that it's a worship somebody because he's a Nobel laureate. It's really about the fact that if somebody presents some ideas and those ideas have a basis that's solid and it moves the market, even if you don't like the person, you have to take the time to try to understand what he's talking about to determine whether or not you can apply what that person is doing to have a better global understanding of what's going on. And I think that's definitely the case with Professor Paul Krugman. I hate getting into this, but I will anyway. One of the challenges that Tesla is facing right now is what's going on with Bitcoin. And I would say that the challenge is that Bitcoin obviously is in decline, and I was kind of stunned to look in Seeking Alpha and other places and hear discussions now of a $20,000 Bitcoin. So things obviously have moved down from the 65,000 into the mid 30s. 30,000s is kind of where we are now, and my anticipation is that that number, might and will continue down. And the hope is that, a lot of people don't lose a lot of money in the process. But I really wanted to sort of tag on Bitcoin to Tesla, because if Elon doesn't sell, they may take a loss on the holdings that they now have if they're not already doing so. I think something happened with Bitcoin this week that's scary, and that I think anticipates where things are going, let's say over the next 2 or 3 weeks, which is I really think that we just got a word from the folks at JP Morgan is that they're going to allow their dogs to attack. What do I mean by this? Well, if you work on Wall Street, there's something called the analyst program. And basically, it allows you to move around the bank and work with different bankers that are experts on their particular fields. And then you sort of select, mutual selection, I think, you or they select you, and you're working now in that area. Now, I bring this up because the feeling I've gotten is that some of those banks have been restrained in allowing their traders to optimize their interest, which is to make money off of the Bitcoin phenomenon. Now, when you get into this game, a big part of it is those guys have unbelievable computing power, unbelievable amounts of capital to work with, as well as some really smart people with a lot of experience. And this is the group we tend to refer to as market makers, because they have all these resources with which to manage, control, influence what's going on with stock prices, particularly of certain companies. And I really believe that Jamie Dimon's comments regarding JP Morgan and this is Bitcoin being a bad idea is a sign that those guys are going to start to go after Bitcoin in a fairly intense way. And I really am concerned because the dedicated Bitcoiners are on the team. There's no doubt about that, which is a good thing, which is why it's gotten up to where it is. The problem that pops up is once the pros start to inflict punishment in the ways that they can with techniques that smaller entities or individuals with not as much money work with, I just think we end up now in a very ugly situation for the Bitcoin owners, because the nature of the attacks, the amount of capital being used, etc., is going to create sort of circumstances we haven't seen in a very long period of time, or haven't seen yet for this space. And so I think it's just going to be very difficult. So I just think they're going to get smashed is the basic thing, because all the money is on the downside of this, not necessarily on taking the risk on the upside. So if you're a part of the revolution, be ready for a wild ride, because there are some really smart people with a lot of money, a lot of technique, that are restrained when it comes to stocks, etc., and they're not with Bitcoin. And so the 50% haircut we've seen in the last month has occurred, and the idea is, in theory, we should get a nice bounce up from this. But I really think that, it's a circumstance where it's circling, and you're going to see some bloodletting that is, people will try to explain away, but it's really the issue that I think it's generally kind of a good idea, Bitcoin and the other coins, but when there's so much money to be made destroying them, I just think that we end up with a destructive environment that sort of shows up, and the big players now have reason and are approved to go after it. So we'll see what happens, and we'll definitely keep you abreast of what our thoughts are on this whole thing. So in general, for the coming week, we're seeing a, hopefully market allows Tesla to become comfortable. I think we see more of the 3-day rule, call it the 2-week rule, where institutions are getting better positioned on the Plaid numbers from Tesla. So we, in theory, have a decent sort of upside. But if Bitcoin jumps through the floor, obviously that's going to negatively affect Tesla's profit numbers, etc. At any rate, look forward to keeping you abreast of what we learn with our Every Other Day show. And we also look forward to constructive criticism of everything said. Please remember to like and subscribe. And this is where we get into our health tips. Wanted to encourage you again to think about the usual, which is if you're going to do lovemaking, don't eat large meals prior to allow blood flow to go to other activities rather than just to the food you're digesting. Also want to encourage you, particularly on that long holiday weekend, to get out and do something called uh, forest bathing, getting out into nature, hike, walk, bike, whatever it is, to allow sort of you to be rejuvenated by that kind of an environment. Third, wanted to encourage you to think about a 5-2 or one of the other diets as a way for better health management. Fourth, don't forget no more than once a week for fried foods. 5, also wanted to encourage you to consider um, doing your own sleep research. In this case, the focus would be, um, I would say, try to maintain the same sleep and wake schedule for a couple of weeks, because that rhythm or circadian rhythm management is one of the ways in which your body gets comfortable, and when it's comfortable, it makes you happy. And so, getting and establishing and maintaining a sleep schedule is a key part of working this out. At any rate, want to thank you again for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Let's make some money this coming week with an improving economy, as well as new products from Tesla that are impressive. Tschüss German, au revoir French, Lehitro, Hebrew, Choda Hafez, Farsi, Strazuche, Russian, Ni hao ma Chinese, Konbanwa Japanese, Heido Swedish, and good day our friends in Australia. Namaste our friends in India. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us, and have a great evening.